amazing brothers. And so this was going to be a very fun and exciting time tonight. We are
Right.
here in the month of April. I can't believe we're already halfway through April. 2025 is zooming by so fast. And we've had so many different topics that we've gone through. But the very first show we started talking about was about DNA and family with your wife, Christina. And so we're going to come back around and continue on because it was such a widely received uh, topic and one people had so many questions about. And so we just want to keep going deeper into it. So, Elder Burns, can you explain to us? We're going to talk tonight about restoration. What does restoration mean to you in the context of ancestry and family history?
Well, I would say that we don't know all that we've missed from ancestors, but if it's a blessing from God, we want it back. We
Right.
don't know how many lives before us were either canceled or their purposes or gifts or talents or blessings to the world were blocked in some type of way. But we want them. Sometimes we know. Sometimes we can see everybody in the family sings. Sometimes we see everybody in the family play sports. Everybody in the family dance. Everybody in the family is a public figure. Sometimes we can see it.
Right.
But even the people that we know well, often, and even ourselves, we have gifts, talents, blessings that are supposed to come out. And maybe they don't come out. Maybe we live 100, 105 years old and they still don't come out. But that doesn't mean that it can't be inherited by those who come after us in the same manner those who came before us. Whether those blessings came out or not,
Mhm.
I want them. And so take a chance at seeing it that way, that there's good from God that's supposed to come to us, and we want it all.
Exactly. Do you think that a lot of families are on the path to looking for restoring it all, taking back, reclaiming, or are as part of your assignment, you feel like to help us get where we need to go?
I believe that in the same manner, sometimes in religious or faith circles, we'll talk about that God-shaped hole in the heart. You're looking for something, looking for something, looking for something. Um, I believe most of us have things that we can't put our finger on
Right.
that's missing, or something that we do uh, and think, is this right? Does this
Right.
fit? Does this seem like, you know? And God doesn't have to do any repeats on making anybody a cookie cutter of anybody else. But the fact of it is, He's a father, and He has, by the Spirit and through the flesh, sent some things down through that's supposed to keep going down through. Even if it skip a generation here or there, we actually see that. So
Right.
considering that there's more available to us is a greater possibility. Although I would say there, as far as the DNA and the searching, I think this whole thing before the DNA search, there was a movie that came out called Roots back in the 1970s that kicked everybody into overdrive about finding out who their roots was, and it hasn't slowed down since.
Right. Yeah. The movie's a little bit older than me. It predates me by a couple of years, but I'm familiar with it. Um, so when we talk about restoration and family and DNA, I think about a lot of times in families, we tend to say to our kids, to our nieces, our nephews, our grandkids, you got that from so and so. You do that like your grandfather, you do that like your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother, your, people that that child doesn't even know. My grandson picked up a baseball when he was like a year and a half, maybe. And I said to my mom, I don't even think anybody in our family plays baseball, even watches baseball. And she said, your great grandfather played baseball,
Yeah.
So I just think sometimes when we're looking at these things in our families, of course we have to do the work like Aunt Christina said, but sometimes some things I think, or maybe you can share, we have to get through the spirit, or we're catching it through the spirit, I guess is what I'm saying, and we don't even realize it.
Right, right. Well, both are true. You should do the work if you have this. First of all, if you have a desire to do it, do it. If you've been thinking about do it, do it. If you don't know where to start, well, start. Um, a lot of people have made me an insight, an unction, an inkling about different things. Excuse me. And I would say act on that. As you mentioned, my grandfather, your great grandfather. Mm-hmm. Everybody has, that's one of those things, is that if you talk to other people in the family, older, younger, it comes out. And plenty of people that I would speak to in the family, I can hear the same story like 11 times, as they say. And then one day, my mother or my father or grandparent or uncle would say something, and I'd be like, what?
Right.
They say, well, you know that. I mentioned that before. It's like, no, you ain't never said that to me. And it'll be something that has to do with ancestry or talents, gifts, things that have reoccurred in the family, blessings, that sort of thing like that, characteristics.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to keep talking, because my mom had said to me, I've talked to you about him before, but she had mentioned that he played in the Negro Leagues. And she said, well, he knew Satchel Paige, and she's having all these conversations. And I thought, I don't recall ever hearing that, but it's about repeating and about, about talking. And I often think, now that I'm a grandmother, I didn't care about any of these things when I was younger, but I remember my own grandfather, your father, would sit and talk to me about, I remember maybe being about 12, and him talking to me about, we were watching Jesse Jackson. He said, I know him. And, and you kind of think, okay, whatever. And then as I got older and I fell in love with civil rights and different things, and I thought, then knowing him, and he was part of the Black Caucus and all these, and I was like, my grandfather's a walking, NAACP's walking Black History moment, but he was his grandpa to me. So it's important to keep having these conversations and sitting that's why we had the supper table when we were growing up, to share those different things, and we miss it, but we can do it virtually, of course, now. But now that I have a generation under my children, it's just like, I want my kids to know who all they come from, what all goes through them. And some things we will know by doing the DNA and me and 23andMe and all those. Some things we really have to get through the Spirit of God, because what one person got, the other person didn't, so those things are important. Both of us called into ministry, so we would be remiss if we didn't just ask you, good, what are a couple scriptures that our viewers could tuck into their heartstrings tonight about restoration?
Well, I got a few.
I'm sure you do.
and this is from a standpoint of whether it's on the importance of knowing something, whether it's just 3 generations back, or whether it's 1,000 years back, or whether it's more than that. People have different desires about how far they want to go, what they want to know. Some people, they can get back to a certain number of generations back, but they really want a concept. Okay, well, what were people doing then? As a matter of fact, where were they living? Were they in the South? Were they in the North? They were in another country? What was going on? And so that plays a part in it too. What? We're from down south? How? What? We're from up north? How do we end up here? That's part of the story. So one of the things I want to one of the scriptures I want to start with is Acts 17:26, and this is what it says. It says, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined the pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings. So that's a big deal, because you're in Colorado. I'm in Florida. This is broadcast from South Carolina.
Right.
And we're from Michigan.
Yeah.
Okay. How do we end up in these places? Someday somebody's going to want to know how that happened.
Right.
They'll be returning to this, or they're returning to that. But God has appointed times for us to be certain places. And sometimes what he starts in one person in a family, it continues. Or maybe they didn't finish. Maybe they didn't do it at all. Maybe they didn't do that. I think Hezekiah is a great example of that. He was, after the kingdom broke up, he was considered basically the best reformer of Judah, because Israel had just gone buck wild. And so with Judah, he was considered one of the great reformers, but he had a pride issue. Right. And so even though he was a great reformer and all those kind of things like that, he begged God, please, I don't want to die right now. God gave 15 more years. That didn't work out too well. But right. I mean, it worked out good for him because he got 15 more years, but he still never dealt with the pride problem. However, 3 generations later, he's got a great grandson, Josiah, who surpassed him in being a reformer.
Right.
And so it continued. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says, now all things, again, all things are of God, who has reconciled us to himself through Jesus Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation. For anyone who's going to go down a rabbit hole or move a little further, I would say get used to, let it be settled. Reconciled means coming together, settled. I'm going to read some of these definitions I wrote down here. To stick with it, harmony, make compatible, make friendly with.
Right.
First of all, get it reconciled within yourself that this is something you want to do. And where it leads you is where it leads you. Because where it leads you might take you to some great celebrations and the opposite. But if you settled on the fact that, wait a minute, I got here and everybody in my family line is on Earth. What do I know about Earth? Oh, yeah, Adam and Eve, that thing. Yeah, okay, right. So if you get that part out front, then you won't expect a simply fairy tale that everything was lovely and wonderful, but you'll still be able to recognize blessings of God in that. And then I think I want to read one more, if that's fine.
That's fine.
So I have a few more after that, but sure. Acts 3:20 says, and that he may send Jesus Christ, who has preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of his holy prophets since the world began. The restoration of all things. Now that's a lot.
That's a lot.
All things. That's a lot of ancestors. And the tree goes like this. It doesn't go in a straight line. I got 2 grandparents. I got 4 greats. I got 8 great greats. Right. I got 16 great. I mean, it gets big.
Right.
And so the restoration of all of those things that either were gifted into the family, all of those come down into me. And as they come into me, which ones am I supposed to be living out? It doesn't have to be like an intellectual question. It can be just a great journey on finding out things. For me, this part is not hard because I was curious about history. I was curious about family. I was curious about ancestry. Those kind of things. Like I was not even just mine, everybody's. Where you come from? What country? What do y'all do? How did y'all get here? Like kind of things like that. So for anyone who's even close to having that kind of attitude, just go for it. Just go for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
How do you feel these scriptures relate to our understanding of identity and heritage, especially where we are in this day and age?
Well, in this day and age, or any day and age, there's this thing that happened. Now I'm speaking biblically, but I also believe this scientifically.
Right.
Everybody came from Adam and Eve, but then after that, everybody came from Noah and Mrs. Noah. I have her name on here somewhere. But everybody came from there. But they were when the ship stopped, when the ark stopped, it was in one place. Right. How did everybody else end up all these other places? How did all in 10th chapter of Genesis it gives the names of the 7 nations that came out of Noah's 3 sons and their wives.
Right.
Those 70 nations spread throughout the earth. How did that happen? What was our part of it? How, I'm black. Does it mean I came from this, or does it mean I came from that? This person's white. Does it mean they came from here or from there? A lot of interesting things. And as I mentioned, Alex Haley before, it was probably about a year before that came out. I had done a Black History report, because we used to have Black History reports back then, and maybe a year or 2 before. And when they were saying Roots' mini-series was going to be in so-and-so, Alex Haley, where do I know that name? Oh, I had done a history report on Malcolm X.
Okay.
And it was authored by Alex Haley.
Right.
And so on the journey, we can find out. There's people who have been alive who, again, sometimes they're in the family, sometimes they're not in the family. They say, you do this like so and so,
Yeah.
or you do this, or you move like this one, or you remind me of this one, even though you don't look like, or you sound like that one.
Right.
Yeah. So it's that question. People say, "Well, who am I? Where did I come from?" That can be a painful question for a lot of people.
Yes.
Because they don't know. In the new thing with all the things, with it started. I didn't start with, but back in the day there was the movie with Star Wars, and Luke, I am your father. Now it's like you are not the father on TV all day long. Okay, well those things with that those questions were always a challenge throughout history. Anyway, but now through DNA and different things like that, people are confronted or confront, and some people want to find out. And other people don't want them to find out.
Right.
And there can be hurt feelings, different things like that. For the person who wants to go, so it's not just a simple thing for everybody without any emotions right from jump. But still, everybody wants to know. We're all made from God, and we have an enemy who tells us we have no father. So as it is in the spirit, the desire to know where you come from, it's deep down in there. It's not the determining factor of everything that goes on in our life, but why wouldn't someone want to know who they are, where they came from in that respect, in that area? So,
right. This is already so good. I want to shift gears just a little bit. And can you give us a testimony of any people that you've never heard of like growing up, and as you started doing this research, that have been located or discovered or found?
I found people along the way that don't come to mind so quickly when I think about the old-fashioned way, talking to people. Oh, okay, that's so and so, that's so and so. But to a greater level with DNA, I'm going to name two people.
Okay.
One of them is a cousin of mine, and the other is a cousin of mine that I didn't know existed. The first one, his name is David Anthony Taylor, and actually he has a Facebook page. Look up David Anthony Taylor, or look on another page he has that says "All of Our Descendants." Now he did an amazing thing. As a matter of fact, I got this shirt in Zimbabwe for today because an amazing thing happened concerning Ancestry in Zimbabwe 10 years ago. And when I was leaving Zimbabwe is when my results from Ancestry.com came in. I was like, what? I got relatives from here? Wow. That was like nowhere on my radar at all. I knew about the ones that were in Europe. I knew the ones that might be in Asia. I knew about West Africa. No, South Central Africa was not on my radar. And I was right there in the exact place when it came through. So there's a little more that goes to that. But some years after that, I'm getting these messages from Ancestry about that. There's another person you want them to contact you. Do you want to contact stuff like that? I remember this when it came from David Anthony Taylor. And I tried to connect with him and didn't happen. And then amazingly, a year later, I saw it again. And I remembered that it was a year before and there was no contact made. I made contact with him. Turns out that he served in the military, has gone through different challenges, but he was always interested in these things too. But as a part of just helping himself, he really got into it. So I consider him an expert, definitely an expert in this. And at a certain point, when we were back in Kalamazoo, my mother, my brother, and I went to meet him, and he was able to take our lineage, one of our lineages, because, a tree does that, all the way back to Adam. Wow. I mean, all the way back to Adam, which is, I'll come back to that about, if you're able to remind me later about missing link. Okay. Some of us are probably possibly closer to that link than we think we are.
Right.
In the process of time, there was another connection that was made. Now, he introduced me to GEDmatch. So you have these different ancestry DNA companies. The most known one is Ancestry.com. There's 23andMe and some other ones. But GEDmatch is a computer figuration, but they all have different information. Okay. They have some information that overlaps, but they're different. GEDmatch brings them all together so you can see, but it's in a code, so you got to figure out how it works. So in this GEDmatch thing, there's a person that I did not recognize. And somewhere along the line, I'm connected to him, and uh, uh, David Anthony Taylor connects me to him. I talked to him on the phone. He lives in California, and this is one of those situations where it's a challenge, but it turned out good.
Okay.
Turns out that he was my cousin's son, my cousin Greg Burns.
Wow.
And and of that family, there's only one surviving sibling left. And so it was a touchy subject. He spoke to me. He just, hey, just tell me who it is. After I figured out in my head, because he was related to that family on the mother's side and on the father's side. And so it kind of narrowed it down unless somebody did something sneaky. Well, it wasn't something sneaky, but his issue, he's 50 something years old. He wants to find out, why can't they just tell me? What do they think I'm not this a thing? It's like, no, it's, she's the last one left in the family. She'll know. I need to check with her to see if she wants to. What if you find a person and you say, oh, I want to meet him? Well, they have to want to meet you too.
Exactly.
Yeah. And from them, but an amazing thing happens when there's a connection there, because if you want to go down the family line or up the family line, no matter who it is, whether it's someone you know or don't know, there's a multiplication process that happens as far as information and things like that. But it turns out, and he's good with his aunt now, and this has been going. They've been good with each other for the last probably 6-7 years now, and that's how that worked out. I didn't know either one of them existed at all anywhere on the planet at all. So that came through DNA.
That's awesome. So when you can look at, and my mom keeps saying that you literally have the tree to look at, and I think that's probably a little bit even overwhelming, but I keep saying I want to see it myself. But when you started on this quest, how many generations back have you had the privilege of meeting your own or our own relatives since you started this?
That I met personally, I mean, let me see. I would say just to the greats.
Okay.
To have met in person.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's one of those things that, how I look at that now is I've been introduced to about 150 years, 140 years in there, because 65-ish now.
Mm-hmm.
And since I was a small boy, I've been seeing people and meeting people who are 70, 80 years old. You have some kind of contact with them. You have some kind of ear open about what they're talking about. Okay, there's 80 years. They tell you about 80 years of life. Not every second, not every incident, all that kind of stuff, thing like that.
Right.
Then you tack on another 60. Okay, you're up to 140 years of your own life. You're up to 140 years by looking down the family tree 2 or 3 generations.
Right.
And so you can cover a lot in that matter. But I've gotten up to greats. On my mother's side, the ladies, they live a long time.
Oh,
they
yes.
have long lives. And so my mother's mother, she had some aunts, and most of them got to 100 or close to 100. Mm-hmm. And my mother's mother, she was 97, 98 when she passed. And so they were around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. One of my babysitters, I was just talking to my mom about this the other day, that I have these super vivid memories as young as like 18 months. But I know my babysitter when I was 3 was our Aunt Maybelle, and she was close to 100 when she was babysitting me.
Yep.
But I, in my memories, she didn't carry herself. She wasn't an old woman. She was
active.
She was a whippersnapper.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah. But I know that she lived a very long life, very good life, and I have wonderful memories of her. So yeah, the ladies in our family on my mom's side, definitely, they believe in long life. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You kind of touched on it, but just for those who are listening, what are some effective tools or strategies that you would recommend for those who are struggling to find records related to their ancestry or ancestors?
First, I'd say if you haven't spoken to people in the family, try to speak to some people in the family, because the records can be very helpful. Mm-hmm. Records are also sometimes wrong. So, right. But they, even if they're partially right, they can be like a clue to the next step. So start with that. Go ahead and do some ancestry.com because or one of those other companies, because they can connect you with somebody that nobody else in the family even knows.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you end up connecting. So, oh, okay. That's good. Social media. Social media. Say, hey, anybody know about, people do that all the time now. Hey, I'm from so and so and such. This is my family. Anybody know anything about them? And people connect. Have a knowledge of history, at least a little bit. In the 1940s and the 1950s, the Great Migration was exactly that. The Great Migration. There's a whole bunch of people moved all at the same time. But in the history of the world, there's been a bunch of great migrations. And when there wasn't a great migrations, there was still continual migrations of people. So maybe you're looking in the wrong place.
Right.
And I already mentioned DNA tests. Those are good places to start. But I also, again, have your mind open. It's possibly, I still come across little details that I heard decades ago that mean something now that didn't mean as much when I heard it. And some of them, they didn't mean anything when I heard it. Right. And I'm amazed that it's remembered. Maybe it's the Holy Spirit just reminding me, hey, you heard this. Oh, that's what that was. Or that's what that means now. Or that's a connection right now.
Right.
So there's that can be helpful. As an African-American person whose family may have come through the slave trade, the records, even the people who do this, they'll talk about that wall that you hit. But that's a good place. I think that some of that's going to change. In the same way that the stories continued for Alex Haley. So he was able to connect the life of Kunta Kinte, who didn't want to be called Toby.
Right.
Connected the life and knew that he had come from Africa to the ones who are on the other side. So you may have other side who are on the other side of the Atlantic. So you may have a way of getting to 5 or 6 generations. That's a pretty good jump for a Black person. If you get 5, 6 generations, maybe to narrow it down to a certain part of the country, certain plantation, if that's involved. Maybe they were freed persons. There'd be other types of records that would say, yes, this is a colored person lived here.
Right.
And yet this is what I see with that now. Because there was not just that slavery was illegal, but also the smuggling. You want to hide the records. Somebody's coming to get you. You want to burn the records, even if you got a plantation and the Civil War happens. Get rid of everything.
Right.
So, however, if you can get to somebody who was first generation here, then you're only missing the connection to a whole history of people. And I would say possibly all the way back to Noah. Wow. Because even with all of the things that have gone on the African continent with abuses by holding down or moving people against their will, there's still a lot of nations, tribes, people groups who know their history and can tell you this is actually our people group. And if you get down to a people group, then they'll tell you why the names of places now, about a little over 100 years ago, just for World War I, most places were called by the name of a people group, not a political nation. Even if they had politics, they were a people group. But it was only, for the most part, it was just the U.S. and France that it really had jumped out there and said, we're going to have this kind of republic and so and so and so and so. In the United States, we're going to bring other people in. But even just over 100 years ago, I mentioned before, a lot of places in the world, the names of those places still had their biblical names.
Yes.
And so you'd be able to find the people group because those names were usually named after the people group.
Yes.
And that's the way that I found ours was more specific than that. But that's a great thing because why are you calling these people? Because all of us came from Shem. All of us came from Ham. All of us came from so and so, and that's how it goes.
That is really good. I would say personally, I know that talking in the family is important, and social media, I have found even recently, has been so important. On my dad's side of the family, what we just know is basically every Elijah, at least in the United States, we're all related. So I've gotten to the point now that if I see anybody with the last name Elijah on
What up,
Facebook, I
cuz?
just add them as friend, and that's it. We're just like, hey fam, hey cuz, and we'll figure it out on the back end, but we know some kind of way, and it doesn't take long
Yeah.
to I start saying my grandfather's this person, and it's like, okay, I know who that is. It kind of connects.
Right.
But that's
Yeah.
helpful, and that's a tool that we have that definitely hasn't been afforded to other people, so we definitely should use it. But I was thinking, um, just in the last year, all three of my children have asked me a question about our lineage, and
Mhm.
do we have a certain race in our bloodline? Do we have Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian in
Mhm.
our bloodline? And I'm like, you've been looking at your great great grandfather on the
Yeah.
wall in your grandmother's house your
They're
whole
all up in there.
uh, everybody know Big John Burns, but they didn't know that's who that was. So again,
Right.
we have to still keep talking. And so even just I thought, well, if they didn't know that, do my nieces and nephews really know? So it's my, it's been a question that it's just been on my mind. So we have to keep talking. And even while you were sharing, I was thinking something that I think is useful. I think all families should do, because it's so easy to do now, is compile pictures. You can do a video slide, a collaboration, but everything is so visual now that
Yeah.
that even would be, is helpful to share the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I was that's absolutely true. I was as I was thinking about this earlier today, I was looking for a piece of paper that I did not find, but I found something else and ended up getting more information. And I was like, oh, okay, let me just think about this for a minute.
Mhm.
By going online to check a name, and found some more things. But as I mentioned, we got a couple of experts in our family. One on my father's side, that's David Anthony Taylor, and one on my mother's side, and Davis. I think I wrote her name down somewhere. I'll find it somewhere in a minute. But she's married into the family. She's a Caucasian woman, and just she loves doing it. It's
Wow.
for the people who do it, they're addictive to it. So she's been a
Right.
blessing to the Moores, the Malones, and all of us. And she posted maybe about 6 months ago a picture of Grandma Babe.
I saw that. That was
Right, Grandma Babe was about 107 years old when she came up from Arkansas to visit her great granddaughter, my grandmother, and that
awesome.
was a year before I was born. And they
Wow.
put the article in the local newspaper, the Chronicle, and she talked about how it was when the Blue Coats came through, when the Union came through during the Civil War, and what people went through, and again, long livers on that side. is There was another. I'm throw this other anecdote in there with David Anthony Taylor. There was something that connected. We were talking about wanting to recover whatever was missed, whatever was supposed to be down the family line. Okay, so I knew that we were Cherokee in there and we're Choctaw and something. And so he was able to, on my father's side, narrow that down. I believe on my father's father, yeah, definitely on my father's side, Cherokee. On my father's mother's side, Choctaw. But on the Cherokee side, okay, we have a great 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 grandfather
Mhm.
whose name is Moitoy of Tellico. He
Okay.
was considered the highest chief of the at the central most point of the Cherokee Nation, born in the 1600s, and actually his father is considered a greater chief than he was. He's more known,
Mhm.
so he's a greater chief to the white people. His
Wow.
father's a greater chief to the non-white people or the
Okay.
non-Cherokee, because the son is the one who made a deal that kind of started the whole thing of the federal government making deals in civilized tribes and all that kind of stuff. Like, well, that's one of my ancestors. And I thought about it, I was like, well, I'm not going to talk about him. I just talk about the father because he was the one that was down. But he's still my ancestor. So
Right.
in prayer, I want redemption from whatever he did that was wrong. I
Exactly.
want the blessings or whatever that he was doing right. And a wild part about that is eventually 4 generations down the line, one of his granddaughters, whose name was Nancy,
Mhm.
was married a Burns, and that's
Mhm.
how we end up being, at least in that line,
Okay.
uh, British,
Okay.
Irish, Scotch, and Cherokee.
Wow.
And the wild and it go you go back further, and part of that line, and the Burnses that were married into the Burnses were connected from the Webb family, and the Webbs were one of the royal families, and it came from. So, have you ever seen the movie Braveheart?
Yeah.
And they talk about Longshanks,
Hmm.
King Edward. Yeah, that's one of our grandfathers.
I'm about to watch that movie
So,
again.
both whether it's Cherokee or whether it's Britain, well, he
Hmm.
was a bad guy in the movie, but anyway, he did a lot of good stuff. You know, he wasn't a star, but
Hmm.
he did do a lot of things that were good and had to reform. But I'm speaking of 2 different kings, one a Cherokee king and one a British king. Whatever royal stuff that's supposed to come down is good. I want that.
I
And
want
whatever they did that's wrong, I renounce that. And I thank you, Lord, in Jesus' name.
it.
Whatever, I don't want that going down the family line.
Right.
But that's another example, because you're talking about the 1200s. Well, in the
Yeah.
1200s, we just think, oh, it's just Britain. No, they were a people. They were a people, and they know that they came from Japheth. They were a people group, so they could, particularly the ones who are in some position. Yeah, this is my family line all the way back to Japheth,
Mhm.
and for others, this is my family line all the way back to Shem.
Mhm.
And of course, if you end up in the people group, then you just
Right.
go read the Bible and find out what the rest of it is.
There you go. Well, you just answered a question for me, just even about my own family, because here in Colorado, it's a lot of Native Americans here. Obviously, it's their land,
Mm-hmm.
which they will gladly tell you this is our land,
Mm-hmm.
and
As they
should,
should.
as I was saying, should. And so I've befriended some Native Americans here, and go to different events. And a lot of times when they introduce themselves or they're talking to you, the first question is, "Who's your tribe?" And I always knew Choctaw. I've known that since I was probably 9, 10 years old.
Yeah.
But one of the elders there, he's asked me about 3 or 4 times, and he said, "You have Cherokee in you."
Mm-hmm.
And I'd recently asked my mom, and she said, "I think so." So you just answered, but he said, "I see it, I see it." He said, "You
Yeah.
have Cherokee in you." So I'm like, they're when they introduce themselves, they say, "I am of this tribe." But also when you were speaking of the land, and recovering, when people are speaking publicly, Native American, they before they do anything, they repent to the land.
Right.
They repent to the land, and then they thank their ancestors. And I just think those things are so important. They repent to the land for not respecting it, for what's anything that's happened, but they always say, I'm here to honor all of my ancestors, all those who've come before me. It's so I'm so thankful to live here, for all that I've learned, all that it's taught me, very much spiritually, about what it means to be and what family is. I think we've lost the spiritual covenant of family in
Mm-hmm.
time, and what that really means. And so to be amongst this group of people, to really teach us all of that, teach me all of that, or remind me rather, has been awesome.
Right.
It's just it's amazing. So now when I see him, I'll be able to tell him, "You are right. It's Cherokee in there."
Ah, that's right. Now, when I spoke of Moitoy of Telecos, it was the first one that made that agreement with what would become the government. They weren't the federal government yet. It wasn't the United States yet, but it was the British connection. They're making a deal. They kind of moved in that direction. And then the government, when it was developed, they coined 5 tribes to 5 civilized tribes. Without going to the whole deal of what made them civilized, one of the things that made them civilized are if they were willing to become Christian, if they were willing to do trade, but also if they were willing to be part of the slave trade. And so, with that, there was now the beginning of defining from the outside, what a Cherokee is, defining from the outside what a Choctaw is, defining from the outside what a Seminole is. So a lot of people who were Native Americans were because there was a push to get rid of these Indians,
Right.
get rid of these Native Americans. And so they were doing that by sickness, by pushing them out on land, by murder, but also by the letter of the law, mm-hmm. by signing. And so they're the ones who were a certain complexion, they could just reclassify. We now classify them as a freedman. Now reclassify them as a Negro. We reclassify them as a Black person. We reclassify them as an African. And so they were just Native Americans, but they were reclassified. So, and then there was a part where the tribes, or at least the chiefs, some of the chiefs, they were guilty in the willingness to go along with certain things, or to take money from it, or to become slavers. Mm-hmm. And that's a real thing. But where you are out there, I think about this because again in Acts, where it says God has appointed boundaries at certain times, you're going to be on this area in the face of the earth. It's like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to be in America. I don't like the way that some of us got here, but I'm supposed to be here. And it wasn't the first time he used the sin of people to get somebody somewhere. Right. But the Choctaw, a few years ago, we were out west in Wyoming, and we stopped at a Choctaw casino because I wanted to see what they had in there. Went in there, and I saw a lot of Choctaw, but they looked more Asian.
Right. And
most Choctaw I knew and knew of were brown to very, very dark. Mm-hmm. And so, but the mix of how things have happened, the Cherokee probably came from Central Asia, mm-hmm. and they probably came across by Alaska. And this is one of those things where how we understand how people got to different places, we don't need to just get bamboozled about things that have to, oh yeah, it took 10 million years. It took 10, no. One of the things that happens is that when a group of people are subjugated, there's a push to try to force them into a different narrative. Right. So the story that the Iroquois have, or that the Apache have, about how they got to where they got to, is different than what the educational systems, or even the science, so-called science of systems in European-based cultures says. And so it's like, why don't we just go with what people said? They said this is how we got here. Why don't we go with that and then see if you can disprove it, instead of making up this whole deal? What did they say? We had to go through 100 years of saying, I think this would happen. Why don't you just ask them? They told you. Right. So we're down. We are near Texas and Arizona. There's Apache groups that still do the practice of making snowshoes. Yeah, because they used to be up north. Right. But the skill of it came when they were still in central China. And then the history of cars, what was going on in China? Because there's 3 different waves of them coming. Well, there was Genghis Khan. He was tearing up some stuff, and people were getting out of there. So we see that the movements of people, sometimes huge groups of people would move for economic reasons, or because the climate literally did change all of a sudden. Right. The ground ain't no good, or because there was a war, a catastrophic event. And I've seen that within my lifetime in this. When I was in Liberia, 2011, I was supposed to go preach to these people who were living out in the woods. Mm-hmm. And as the days went on, the plan kept changing. And I got that close and never did get out there. Oh, wow. But if you ever see like National Geographic, things like that, people living out in forests like that, you get the idea, okay, all right, these people have been out there since the 1990s when they had a civil war. Okay. It wasn't but 20 years. Wow. So when we're watching TV, it's like, oh, yes, these are the hunter-gatherers. Sometimes when I hear the word hunter-gatherer, it's like, oh, Skip, what do you mean? Something happened and people ended up out there, or ended up in caves, whether it was for maybe a couple of 100 years, maybe it was for 10 or 20 years, maybe it was just since the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And that's the reality. We have a short calendar, mm-hmm. with a whole lot of movement of a whole lot of people all over the earth, whether they walked, whether they got on a boat. It's one of those things too. How did people get there? Because, Spanish hadn't put any boats out. The Portuguese hadn't done it. Well, people were doing boats like about a few thousand years before that. That's how they got
Right.
there. And so that's another thing on a more macro scale that brings me closer. Oh, okay. There's something there. I was going to say something about the Choctaw that's connected to that, but I'm only going to something else with you.
I'm enjoying it. I'm sure everybody listening is enjoying the conversation. I
Well, let
hope
me say this about Choctaw.
everybody listening is taking notes for what you need to do for your own line.
I'm gonna say, because it ends up being pieces that come here and there.
Right.
So I knew about the Choctaw, and every time I thought about this, I had an uncle, Uncle Robert, who would describe his great grandfather, Mitchell Jennings, and he said he was tall, kind of slim, real dark. He said real dark. He had a long ponytail right down his back. Now, he's from South Carolina, as far as we can go back. And his mother, Mary, and father, Otis, they're in South Carolina. I don't know if they came from South Carolina. I don't know if they came from the other side of the ocean. But he doesn't sound like he's from West Africa. Right. Only part that sounds like West Africa is very dark. His hair was wavy, but he was nearly jet black. And so I look at that, and I look at my paternal mother's side of the family, and I think that's the Choctaw connection. The Choctaw Nation that I saw out west was mixed, but they looked more Asiatic and also European. But the ones that came up through Mississippi, there's a real good possibility that they were actually connected to the Mayans. And they didn't just come up to Mississippi. They did some of the mounds that were all the way up into Illinois and Ohio. But again, we're behind on this because first of all, we had to spend 200 years making up a history when they already knew their history.
Right. Right. Well, I know in this particular part of Colorado, I've learned that almost every Native American is mixed with Mexican.
Right.
It creates almost its own race, and so a lot of the Native Americans here speak their tribal language, and they speak some form of Spanish.
Right.
Which is it's kind of cool. You're learning a lot of different things, and so I've recently taken a Swahili class. And so there's people speaking African, there's people speaking in tribal. It's been very, very interesting. But that's just it. That as we migrate, we pick up other races, other groups, and other families, and so we have to really know how we got here, how we traveled, who all we are. There's no pure anything of any race anymore. And so all that knowledge is important. What would you consider to be some common misconceptions of people that people have using DNA to trace their ancestry? I know that I've heard, particularly younger people, it's a fear I'll get bad information, or even, as you said earlier, being open, fear of I'll hear something I don't want to hear in my family.
Well, I don't think that's a misconception. The more you learn, you are going to find out something that you don't want to hear, because we're on Earth. Right. And that thing happened in the garden, and then that thing happened with the boat. And so that will be the case if you keep going at some point. But anybody who thinks that, you ain't got to leave. You ain't got to leave the city to find out something.
Right. That is true.
So I think for someone who already has a desire, they really want to do it, and they think they're going to do it. The misconception that everything is going to be good. No, it ain't going to all be good. I mean, hopefully it'll be very good.
Right.
But there's what I would say, the possibility of thinking, for someone who has a really strong desire to know and is really going after it, the idea that it will answer everything. It's not going to answer everything.
Right.
It's not going to answer everything in detail. It's not going to answer everything in feelings. It's not going to answer everything. Mm-hmm. It may help.
Right.
If depending on what it is. But again, as examples that I've given that are directly connected to our family, it may also hurt. But do you want to know? It ends up being, do you want to know? And how much do you want to know? Do you just want to know your family line? Do you want to know the whole people group? Do you want to go as far as you're back? You want to go into slavery if you're Black? You want to go out of slavery? Maybe you weren't. Maybe people weren't slaves. Do you want to go to the other side? Or do you want to go to the end up? Okay, I'm going to follow the chalk trail. I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to find out some more Mayan stuff. I'm going to okay, the Cherokee. I'm going to find out some more Algonquin stuff, and which we know now the years and how long it took them on 3 different occasions to get from Central Asia to Alaska, to the northern, what's now the United States, to the Midwest, to Michigan, to the East Coast, and then down in what's now North and South Carolina and Tennessee. And should have been listening in the first place. But it's like, oh, okay, this was going on in the 1200s. Oh, the first one happened 300 years after Christ. Oh, that's so and so. What was happening then? Oh, is that other guy was going crazy. People was like, we got to get out of town. They kept going. Is they still coming? Okay, we're going to keep walking. But some of the histories that are not American or Euro-based histories, that type of connection. If it's a family line, if you can get your family line as far back as you can, but you don't have to go but maybe a couple of 100 years. That will be difficult for some people. But if you can get back a couple 100 years, you're going to be into the realm of a whole different world concerning people groups. And even now, people groups continue to morph and to change. African Americans are a people group. Males are a people group. Ethiopians are a people group. Earthlings are a people group. And so people groups continue to morph and change. Southerners are a people group. Northerners are a people group. Northerners who live in the South are a people group. And so, particularly in the United States, there's the cut and dry decision to be very authoritative on the subject of race, which was contrived in so many different ways. And again, just explain one where you decided people who are Native Americans could be reclassified as this and that to shrink their numbers and make a little change. I'll sell them some people. And so the powers that be, whether it's now, whether it's in the days of Kublai Khan, whether it's in the days of the Roman Empire, moving people around for purposes that don't benefit them, changing and morphing people groups. But it still comes down to those 70 languages, or excuse me, those 70 nations that comes in Genesis chapter 10. And a few hundred years ago, those names were still on everything.
Wow. I was thinking I'm gonna have you speak to people who have a fear. What will I uncover or unearth or discover in my family line? I speak to people and I don't want to know if people have committed crimes. What if I find out it's somebody, some of our people own slaves, and just different things that people don't want to know. Or, sometimes people in the family, they met up and you can't control that. All of those different things, but people have these fears. But I think sometimes you have to get past that to what do you discover and what do you learn? Because even like you mentioned Josiah, which is my grandson's name, so it's one of my favorites names.
I thought
but even him, he saved his nation, but they had to hide him from his own mama and grandmama, so in everybody's bloodline, Jesus Christ himself is muddy.
There's nothing, that word says there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
That's true. Period. That's true. So for the person who thinks, I might find somebody who did a crime. Your cousins now do crime.
Right.
And so whatever you think is like, hey, you think, your generation's the first person to do it. But again, I'm making light of it, but that comes down to the reconcile within yourself. What do you want to know? And do you have a realistic view? And even if the realistic view doesn't mean you won't meet something that's like, oh, I need to go spit.
Right.
And so, but that's something now that may have a negative effect down family lines that you can now torch.
Right.
Instead of letting it continue to run all the way down the family line, now you can burn it up. You didn't even know what it was. What is this?
Right.
And of course, the good things that you can find out. And even with that, if you find out somebody who lived 3 generations, you're not going to know every detail of their entire life. You let snippets here and there. And the spiritual part of that is like in contact with God about, okay, show me. Right. What am I supposed to be finishing? The great-great-great-grandma was doing. Right. Or what am I supposed to be continuing? Because it wasn't that she didn't finish her course. It's just, I'm next.
Exactly. I think that's good. And I think for myself, because I've worked with young people for 30 years, learning that I come from teachers so many generations back was so encouraging for me, because you're always asking, where does this come from? But for me, it's so deep in our bloodline. But you just briefly touched on that, and I'm actually go just a little bit deeper when we're dealing with when you discover something that maybe just be hard to swallow. Number one, you don't have to claim that that's what that person did. It does hit the bloodline, but that's not what the person did. But when you deal with that, then you kind of have to cross over into generational curses, because in some families you got decades of drunkenness or different things. And so how do you we're talking about restoration, then how do you restore back to God where something may have gotten off, when you start discovering you may have a bunch of people committing a bunch of murders and hangings and killings and stuff in your blood. I mean, some people do.
One thing is true all over the planet. The earth, the ground is full of blood.
Right.
It is full of blood, and the blood cries out. Okay, are you going to be one of the people who answer? You'll be one who declares something. This ends here, or there's redemption for that, or there's a resurrection of the life that was taken, so to speak, so that the good that was supposed to go does go, continue, things like that. For me, again, I don't make light. I did make light of it, but I'm not making light of this part. Is, do you have a desire to know? And if it goes beyond that, do you have a desire to do something? If you're a person who's spiritual, who believes in God, or who believes in prayer, intercession, anything like that, announcing things, declaring things. If you believe in any of those things that God has told us to do, because again, what did that verse say? It said, and what is it? Whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things. All things. There's supposed to be a restoration of all things. Yes. But now some of that restoration we don't have to wait for. We can be participants in now. Restoration of all things. Christ comes back and shows up and all those things like that. But there's people getting healed right now. They're not waiting for him to come back.
Yes.
There's people who are being delivered from drugs right now. They're not waiting for him to come back.
Right.
There's people who are changing their families for the better right now, and they're not waiting for him to come back. It'll be all things, but you don't have to wait as an observer. You can be a participant in the restoration of all things right now, as the Spirit leads, or as you get information on what needs to be restored. But it says that every family on earth is going to be blessed by Abraham. Okay. There's another word. All, every. Okay. You want to declare that? Want to reclaim that? Want that to be something for yourself? And again, a lot of times until just a few hundred years ago, and really less than 100 years ago, as the modern world is taking place, people lived in groups. So there was a lot of people who had contact with people who it's really only been like a couple of 100 years where they still do that. The royals still do that. They're always marrying relatives. Things like that. It's not days of of Moses anymore, where Moses had to say, okay, stop marrying your close relative. No, right. You can't marry your sister. No, you can't marry your brother. No, you can't marry a close relative, stuff like that. But in much of the world, first of all, that still goes on. And then even a few decades back or a century or so back, it was still common for people to marry second cousins. Second cousin, I'm in. All right. So that's been the real situation across the planet. To find out whatever we find out, there's a possibility to find out something good. You can find out something that's very hard and still take it good because all of a sudden you have knowledge of it. You find out you had an ancestor who started businesses. None of them didn't work, but they never give up. You'd be like, oh man, they're tough.
That's it.
Yeah, they never gave up. And what happened? Okay, I don't know what happened. Their kids survived and they were successful. I believe, knowing is better.
It is.
In most cases. Now it doesn't have to be a waste of time if your direction of using energy is not to be completely enamored with every detail and everything about your ancestry. But there's things, and again, even though I have a desire for this, it seems like a lot of information just jumps up and grabs me out of nowhere. When I was in Zimbabwe, some things just grabbed me out of nowhere. There was a few people there who would not accept the idea that I was not there. And then when I got ready to leave, it's like, oh, I guess 10% says I am here. And I'll never forget the one woman she didn't play at all. No joke at all. She's adamant. She's like, you need to check with your mother.
Wow.
Yeah. And the odd thing, she looked like a cross between my mother and cousin Joanne.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing thing. Another guy who was a sister of mine, Tawanda, and there's another. My mother has a very distinct look to me. Maybe I'm saying that because she's my mother, but I think she has a very distinct look. Her father has a very distinct look.
Yes.
Oldest brother on the side, James, very distinct look. I saw that distinct look among one of the 12 families that make up the tribe of the Limba, the Sadiq. And they are the ones who are the royal tribe of the priesthood. By the way, the Limba are the children of Moses' brother, Aaron. That's who they are. They know their history. Mm-hmm. Okay, so DNA found out something like about 10 or 20 years ago. Well, 100 years before that, whether it was in West Africa with different tribes who were obviously Jews, so as the term goes, or obviously Hebrews, it was important to the people who were writing books and saying things to say they think they're this, they think that. Well, they weren't trying to prove anything to anybody.
Right.
And the ones who were keeping it a secret were keeping it secret because of persecution locally, not because they were of something else. Same old story in that area. So yeah, even along those lines, a lot of in the days of Sennacherib, and we have a picture of this thing, Sennacherib, when he went after Hezekiah, and Hezekiah prayed, and 185,000 got smoked. It's like, there's a picture of that whole story, not that part of it. It's in the British Museum. Wow. Which is after Sennacherib had gone around and beat up all of the walled cities in Israel, and he gets now to the capital. He had just been to Lachish, which was the second most famous, second most populated, second most powerful city in Israel, and he slaughtered them. And they made a big relief, huge reliefs of them throwing people over the wall and all this kind of stuff like that. And they're in the British Museum. And them was Negroes. And so whether it's then or whether it's the Babylonian challenge, or whether it's the Syrian challenge or the Roman challenge, and all those situations, those people scattered, just like Deuteronomy and other parts of the Bible says. And they ended up in a lot of places around the world, mm-hmm. including North and South America and throughout the Caribbean. Again, there's ways to reconnect with that, because again, there's people who are on the other side who are not necessarily part of the organizations that are in the nation state that we call Israel right now, but are part of the people group who have never stopped being from the sons of Jacob. Okay. And it can be one link away. That's what I believe I experienced when I was in Zimbabwe. But I haven't proceeded further on that in some other kind of technical way. You can take, there are ways to, if you're African American or Black throughout diaspora, there are different tests that you can take that are specifically for us to match with certain kind of people groups. And again, in those people groups, they were moved around a lot too.
Okay.
And different nations developed within them. But yeah.
I know you've done a lot of work, and your wife has done a lot of work. Have you met anyone that when you encountered them or met them, they said, "I've been waiting for you," or they knew you before you knew them?
Good question. Well, being a Burns, it happened a lot of times. I see them Burns out. You're Burns. You're Burns. But also, now the wild part about, because the Burns eyes is actually the Caldwell eyes. That's actually my grandmother's eyes, but she has my
eyes.
grandfather's last name. Yeah, which I believe, again, I believe that's a Choctaw connection here. But same thing for me on the Malone side, because there's several people in the Malone family like, oh, you gotta be.
Yeah.
There's other places, again, like again, Zimbabwe stands out the most because they were so adamant. And then for them to be that adamant, and then we get the blood thing, the DNA thing shortly after that. People from other areas of the Caribbean will ask questions. You sure? You sure? You sure? You sure you're not?
Wow.
People from certain places in Africa, or people from Africa, will say, yeah, you gotta be. As a matter of fact, in the same way that Black people are more likely to notice details about Black people that white people don't, and vice versa. That happens when you go to the continent, in different areas, different ways. It's changing more now because more people are on social media, you get a chance to see. And you get to places like, oh, this looked like the whole family. There's a famous statue of King Tut's father or grandfather, very slim face, pronounced lip, but very slim face. And I thought, man, that looks just like Mr. Tommy Lee Dawson. Now, we know brother Robert Lee Dawson, but he had an older brother who's quite a bit taller, slimmer. It's like, that looks just like. But you see that face in a lot of different places. In North Central Africa, those who come from Rwanda or East Africa, you see the structure. But all of the structures that exist over there exist here too. So yeah, sometimes people will, I even hear people will stop me and ask. When I first got here, really the first 3 or 4 years here in Tampa, I would get stopped, and some guy who lives in St. Pete, and they tell me who he was, and they say, no, everything. You sure? You're sure? Yeah, I'm sure who I am.
Wow, that in itself is exciting. So, how important is community support in the journey of restoring family history, and what role can specific organizations play, or what organizations can you think of that are helpful in that?
I think community support is more important than not important. If somebody has the drive as an individual to do it and there's no support, I still say go for it. Just get set on the idea. Everybody might not be happy with it, especially come out with some details, information, stuff like that. But where there's community support, then there's community. Right. Oh, we are of this. We are of this people group. The purposes of being a people group is not for, play on words that we have now. No, just say you're this. Just say you're an American. Just say, knock it off with that. I don't know how many times somebody said, why can't, a guy told me one time, he said, why does it got to be African American? Why can't they just say an American? It's like, yeah, I've been tired of that too. I'm getting tired of people who are saying I'm Dutch, I'm German, and then he shut up because they need to put the American part on there. Right. And so the thing of saying this on a family, is there, for those who are biblically minded or word minded, look, if it's not important, why did God spend all that time telling people with big, gigantically long list of people's names, where they're from?
Right.
And then when you get to a part where you find out, oh, Canaan Canaan was in trouble anyway because they weren't supposed to be over there. They were supposed to be over there where Morocco is. No wonder they were supposed to get kicked out of the land.
Wow.
And so again, that's the X part. He's appointed times for people to be in particular places and people groups and nations and families to function in a certain way, to do certain things. And as a matter of reconciliation and restoration, a time to come back together or to return, whether it's a return geographically, whether it's a return in the mindset of we need to reestablish, because, through the Old Testament, they were always reestablishing. And sometimes it's like, okay, this is not work. We're going to have to sit down and read the entire book all day long so you get back to Clue City on this thing.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the reestablish. That was part of the reinstituted, restoring book of Nehemiah and times like that. It's like, okay, I can keep saying stop doing wrong. I can keep saying that. Let me read the whole history again. And when you read the whole history, everybody cries. So we got to change. We need to be who we are.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is true of us, even though we are many nations, cross paths, started from the 70, still everybody from the one seed. Nevertheless, we would see that there were different families and nations who were called to special skills, assignments, appointments, and sometimes not for a lifetime, sometimes for a short period of time. And so why not know?
Right. Right. I think community support is helpful when you're looking at restoring family history, because not just your family, but the people who grew up around your family knows things. When I worked in Muskegon Heights public school system for about 3 years, I always joke about it because I look like the perfect blend of both of my parents, and my parents both were so prominent in school, and nobody even called me by my name. I was either little Dwight or little Bernadette or Miss Burns or Miss Elijah, and I was like, none of those are my names, but okay. But I learned so much about my mom and my dad that I didn't know. And I knew a lot about my parents prior to working there, but I worked with all of their teachers, because people in Muskegon don't know how to doggone retire. So, but I worked with the people who taught them. So, I got to talk to my dad's coaches. And so it's one thing to hear, he's a good football player, but to hear from people who played with him and coached him, and to hear so much about my mom and how brilliant she was and how smart she was and student she was. And I got to work literally alongside her band teacher, and for him to talk to me about her. But not just that, my grandmother taught in the school system. So my grandfather was on the board. So then after a while, I started learning so much about who I was. My dad was him and his brothers were a part of a singing group. So I learned more about my dad's family that way. So I had no idea taking that job would immerse me into my family history. And I didn't even really think about it so much till we were having this conversation. I took away so much in those 3 years that was priceless, because these are the people who knew them and in a different way than their relatives did. And so that was so special and so important. And some of those people to this day, they're friends of my parents, but when they see me, it's just as beautiful. And so I cherish that. So the community support is important. So I say that for those listening, if you can visit where your parents went to school, your grandparents went to school, go to your grandparents' church, those things that you think very little of, your history is there. It's in those walls. It's amongst those people. And you started off by saying, have those conversations. And I think when I was a little girl, my grandfather, Melvin Burns, he would just stop by the house with random people and say, this is your cousin. I wanted to meet your cousin. And he'd be there like 5 minutes and say, okay, I gotta go. And I'm like, oh, okay. But as I got older and you see these people again, and it's like, okay, yeah, I knew that. But he was always making sure that we knew who we were related. That was important to him. And he would say that it's important for you to know who your family is. And so I think a good way for us to start, and you can chime in on that, is also reflect on all the conversations that you heard growing up. You know,
Right.
I had to sit down and think about all the things that I just heard my grandmother. I remember watching a basketball game, and Karl Malone was one of my favorite all-time basketball players. And my grandmother saying, "You know, we're related to him, right?"
Right.
You know, so and
Yeah.
I just told my husband that the other day, and so I'm like really special to him right now for the moment. So, uh, so those things, you know, sometimes we throw that information away, but it's information. It's your information. It's your history. So I think those type of things are helpful.
You you mentioned Karl Malone, my youngest uncle. He talks about the time that Karl Malone was very young in the league,
Mm-hmm.
and Daddy Henry, his father,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather, TV's on. He said, "Who's that right there?" He said, "That's he's a basketball player." So he says, "I don't know who he is, but you related to him."
Wow.
Yeah, just seeing him one time. Now, when I see him, he only looks like one person in the family to me,
Mm-hmm.
but everybody doesn't see. You know, you have
Right.
two family members. He said, "Well, their nose is not alike, their lips are not alike, their eyes not alike," and everybody still, yeah, they related. It's
You're
still
right.
something else. Still something else too. I was I've mentioned David Anthony Taylor a few times. There was something else that I was going to say about a particular connection. Oh, here it is. This is a kind of a conversation that probably lasted several, that had pieces over decades. I
Mm-hmm.
never heard that my grandfather on my father's side had siblings, nor did his father had siblings. Now, I'm the son of Melvin, who's the son of
Mm-hmm.
James Thomas, who's the son of Tom, who's also the son of Tom. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that, it goes European. And so probably 2003 or so, I remember the time because I was getting ready to move out of a house. And I got a call from Uncle Robert. And we were talking for a while, as we always do, and going at Jesus. And I said, Uncle Robert, isn't that wild that Paul didn't have any siblings, and his father didn't have. And he said, oh, there was an uncle. I said,
Wow.
what? What uncle? I said, and then I didn't want to be embarrassed because he was getting up there in age, and I said, did you say that there's an uncle? I said, yeah. And so what was his name? He said his name was Kill. I said, okay. Yeah, what was his name again? He
Mhm.
said Kill. I said, all right. I didn't want to be like,
Right.
okay, did you really mean that, or am I hearing this right? You mean like kill, like take somebody's life? Yeah, his name was Kill.
Wow.
Kill, what was the kill? What? Kill Burns. What?
Okay.
So think about that. Was 2003 ish.
Wow.
Uncle Robert died in 2010. I come in contact with David Anthony Taylor around 2016, 2017, 2018.
Mhm.
And we really connect after that. And he has all this information. His mother's name was Lula Faye Burns.
Okay.
And Lula Faye was the daughter of Kill Burns Jr.
Wow.
And so Tom's father and Kill Burns Sr. were brothers.
Wow.
And just a little piece. But it's just of course, if his name would have been like Joey, I might not have remembered, but that's the only person
Right.
I ever
Don't
heard of
forget
named Kill.
Kill.
And it just went down an amazing rabbit hole. Found out, okay, either I'm a first cousin, once removed, or a second cousin, first place, something like that, with his mother, and just amazing. But that's just been a tremendous connection because, as I said, we have two actual experts. One on my father's side, who takes us all the way back to Adam. One on my mother's side, who comes up with a whole lot of information and a lot of pictures and a lot of documents. Like I've got a great one of our grandfathers who was fighting against the government. Is like, hey, I fought in the Civil War and I want my
Wow.
pension. Now that sound like Henry. I
Yeah.
want my pension.
Wow.
Right.
So what do we say as we're going to conclude soon, but what do you say to families who have nothing? Like they only know what they're barely past mom and dad. What do you say to them? How do you we've kind of talked about the methods, but how do you even, I know you've said multiple times you have to want, but where does that spark, where does that fire come from? Because we should all want to. You can't make anybody, but
No, you can't.
information can be lost if
Right.
it's not shared.
This tool that's been mentioned, it wasn't there before.
Mm-hmm.
Even when people said, I know, this tool was not there before. So DNA testing,
Mm-hmm.
test DNA. And the more people who get some type of DNA, there's more and more people who are in the banks of DNA all the time. And so if there's nobody to go to, and of course that can be the situation where if there was an adoption, or if there's many kind of situations where the person would find themselves either alone. Just people who were adopted didn't know they were adopted. And I mean adopted by relatives that didn't know they were adopted, or somebody else in the family was the actual mother or the actual father, different things like that. And so with DNA, it takes you to a person you ain't got to know nothing about. Mm-hmm. It takes you into a family line. You know, if you think about this, not just concerning African Americans, but so much of the history of the world, there was slaves that were shipped around the world. Everybody in Central Asia, now they ended up over here in Spain.
Right.
You know, 500,000 of them end up in Spain. It's like, I'm Spanish. And they go to DNA test. It's like, no, I'm Yugoslavian. It's like the Wayans, the oldest Wayans brothers, brother. He was on Finding Your Roots, or with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. And they find out that he's connected to the Melanesian through his father's side. Mm-hmm. Now the Melanesians, they're Asiatic, but they're black.
Yeah.
But then most of the world was black, which is another, I might get into a little bit, I'll come back to that. Mm-hmm. But he says, I came on here and I've been thinking black, and I found out I'm Chinese. Because, that's how it is. But when people are moved around, a lot of people get DNA tests. They found out and if two siblings, same parents, the numbers are still going to be different.
Right.
They may be close, but they're still going to be different. But it gets you in the arena. And really that's good from what they can tell for judging something up to maybe about 400 or 500 years, which is another thing. But again, if you get back a couple hundred years, you're going to end up in a people group, in a family group with names in the old fashioned way. But if you get a DNA test, if you want to do it, if you want to find out, if you want to know whether it has to do with your own fears or the possibility of not wanting to offend somebody else who says, don't let it be known, don't let, you want to find out, get the DNA test. And the probability continues to grow that you're going to be connected to somebody who's in somebody's banks, and that won't take you to your ancestor. In most cases, it will take you to a descendant, and they'll be closer to tell, okay, looks like, okay, you'd be the first cousin of this person, but there was only one child in that family before them, so it means this, there was the uncle and you begin to figure it out. You first end up at least on the field, at least in the neighborhood. And then you figure out what street, what address through other means. But DNA. That's where I would start for somebody who wants to. And again, with the part about making somebody, I don't think you ought to try to make somebody. Somebody don't want to, they don't want to. And now if it's somebody you want them to because it will help you, maybe you want to try to lean on them. If they're just adamant, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, that could be a challenge. Then okay, we'll check with their brother and sister. Maybe they'll do it. The same bloodline.
Right. Yeah.
So there's kind of a cross referencing that happens if you don't check with this person. One of the things we found out when my mother took DNA tests is that she has a higher percentage of African than most African Americans.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, yeah. And on my father's, on my father's side, just go a couple generations back, and it's obvious there's different things, but you don't know, because on his mother's side, very dark complected, squat. Right. But does that mean Does that mean that, for me, I believe that has more to do with the line of Shem being in South America and them moving northward, as opposed to the line of Ham coming across on a boat.
Okay.
There's a lot of that down in the Mississippi Delta. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Around New Orleans and Louisiana, what have you.
Well, this should spark at least some type of fire, I think, in a lot of people that are viewing. I definitely hope so. You mentioned something that I know to be true. I think probably is maybe a little bit tough for some people to swallow, that most of the world was of color, at least at some point. I know I study revivals, and I was studying. I was looking at specifically revivals in Asia, and looking at it was out the further back I went, I was like, these people getting darker and darker.
Right.
You know.
Right. And you ain't got to go that far. Because they're pictures. You have to go that far. This that's very, very true. And now this is a matter of people deciding, because in our state there's this so-called patriotic stuff. But we only want to tell one kind of history. Just tell the truth. Tell that kind of history. You know the truth, and the truth will make you free. This might make somebody feel bad. That lie you've been telling might make somebody feel bad. So just tell the truth. And so again, that a whole thing of people have their own histories. Can they say their own histories because you've captured them or you subjugated them? Now you got to give them a history. No, this is your narrative. That ain't who I am. My name ain't Toby. My name is Kunta. So there's a doctor by the name of Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson. He has done some some wonderful, magnificent work with Y-DNA tests. Now, Y-DNA, that's the male side. Now, the mother's mother side, we find that, that actress Lupita Ngonga. She's from Kenya. She's part of the oldest haplo group, and they found that through the matrilineal DNA. And an amazing thing. Okay, that encompasses everybody, because everybody came out of that. Everybody came out of it. Everybody on the planet of Earth, furthest north, furthest south, they came out of that. That is the oldest haplogroup. All the other haplogroups came from that. Now, on the Y-DNA side, it pictures the way that he's done this. It actually kind of sets up markers. It sets up markers. I believe it's 22, 20, 28, 25. Proverbs. Do not remove the ancient landmark.
Right.
So think about this, a landmark. It's passed down for family. As wild as Ahab was and all the crazy stuff he was doing, God really got, because he killed a guy and took his vineyard. A vineyard that would have gone down the family line. That would have been his children's vineyard. Now, I'm sure he wasn't crazy about him killing the guy either, but I mean, they were into Baal worship and child sacrifice, and so they was doing killing already, but it's like, okay, get him out of here. He killed a guy and took his name. He took his land from him. And so when you're taking away someone's name, someone's land, someone's history, someone's identity.
Right.
So no, that ain't who you are. That ain't who you are. Well, I believe I'm supposed to be who he said I am, both inside and out, spiritually and naturally. He placed certain persons, every person, in different points, though we all come from one blood, different points on the earth with set boundaries at different times. People mess that up. Guys, Jonah, maybe you want to go to Nineveh your way. Maybe you don't want to go to Nineveh, but he still will get you there at an appointed time, and it might be the hard way. And so with that, this Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson, he works with Answers in Genesis, which I was, I used to, very connected to what they did. And you can see the markers of where different people groups moved and where different people groups were changing. And he's talking to a guy named Ken Ham, who I became familiar with about 35 years ago, something like that, through Answers in Genesis. Because one day I asked a question talking about this. I remember I was turning back to Christ. I believe the word of God, but there's a curious side about certain things. And I asked God about dinosaurs. The very next day, all this stuff about the creation and stuff came up. They were in town in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and stuff like that. Found different things like that. So he's talking to Ken Ham, and he's saying, we've gone through your white DNA and you've gone through my DNA, and we are as white as you can get. But when we go through the Y DNA of where we're from, we find out we ain't got to go back but about a few hundred years, not a few thousand, a few hundred, not a lot of hundred, a few hundred years. And we are in families of dark complected people.
Yes.
And so sometimes it's okay to let the science, that's real science, do the talking, because when it's true, it's not going to be something else. All these other theories, it had to take 50,000 years. Where does that number come from? Is there a scientific answer where the word comes from? No, there is not a scientific answer where it comes from. But there is a scientific answer on things that we can measure, like the Y DNA, the matrilineal DNA, what history actually says, what people painted. Yes, up there in Britain, there was a whole lot of very dark people 500 years ago. Yes, in Roman times, it was built by some very dark people. Yes, if you go into Chinese history, their oldest persons in China, they were dark complected. Yes, even in Japan, where they're very bright, when you go into their history, they will say their own history says who they are.
Yes.
Southeast Asia, their own history says who they are, what they look like, what the originators of whether it was Asia, Europe, Central Asia, Africa, or North or South America. You find this over and over again. Development from Central Asia was one of the first times where there was a large group of a lot of light complected people who were coming out of that area. And so everybody used to have melanin. And melanin is good. Melanin is healthy.
Yes.
Treat it well. And since everybody got melanin on the inside, okay. It's not like nobody ain't got it.
Man, thank you so much for all of your time. We could be here all night long on this subject. We will have to do a part 2 for sure. This has just been so enlightening. Real quick, do you have any last words or any last information or anything in your spirit you want to share before we pray?
Just a few things and then I'll pray. First, thank you, Elder Leya, for being a great interviewer. Brought out the best in me. I hope it's the best in me. You do a great job. And for anybody who wants to do it, I would say first, go ahead and scratch the itch. Go ahead. You want to do it, go ahead. Settle on some things inside yourself and do it. The things that have to do with fears, consider what the fears are. Are they about yourself? Are they about other people? But the itch not going to go away. So I encourage people to go places. You found out that your people are from Oregon. Go to Oregon. Right. Go there, see what was happening. Do something about history. An amazing thing, spiritually speaking. One of the best places for me to go, both as a person who intercedes and a person who loves history, is museums. Sometimes the museums are kind of weak on the history part, but it's huge on the intercessory part. Because even the part of their history is either whitewashed or tampered with, something happens when you begin to tell a little piece of the truth that hasn't been gone. So share the info with family. See if somebody starts talking about something they never talked about. I found out from my hometown maybe 25 years ago that about 1 out of 6 families had a different last name. And the reason was a very simple but common reason. Somebody in the family down south beat up some white dude. And when they left, they changed part of their last name. So they come get 1 out of 6. 1 out of 6. Wow. Now I'm saying just over 100 people that I interviewed, but these were people who were my peers' parents. And they all would do the same thing. They say, well, our last name before we got up here was And it's like the rest of the family came one by one, and all of them just changed the last name too. It's like, because
Wow.
everybody ended up working at Lakey's or Camels or everything like that. That's how that great movement went. Change one letter, whatever, or change the whole last name. Reconciliation comes before restoration.
Yes.
So whether it's reconciliation with people who are in your family who've already passed, even the ones who you did know and you weren't crazy about how they treated you or how they treated themselves or anybody else. The reconciliation part is a settling. So a reconciliation within yourself, reconciliation with God. God's given us a ministry of reconciliation, settling within yourself about how this is done. So see reconciliation as something that's foundational, like the foundation of a building. And then see the restoration is just that. You've seen a place has been restored. A lot of times when a building is restored, it's a whole lot prettier afterwards than it was before. A lot more beauty before. Got some newfangled stuff hanging on it and different things like that. And so the restoration also can be considered. I mean, it's I'll say some of the words, and then some of the words for restoration is like that I have. There's the words that are in the dictionary, but to renew, to re-beautify, to repurpose, to resurrect. So restoring, yeah, the foundation, the very bottom part, the complete whole part, the vessel that this sits in is reconciliation. But the restoration, oh, that can and should be an overflow of beauty, an overflow of things we didn't know about, of secrets that are magnificent, wonderful, things that have been denied, that nobody knew was denied, and just a daily wonderment if we're talking about restoring, recapturing, and being redeemed and redeeming stuff to the family line, to our family line going up and the family line going down. Because the ones that have gone before us, oh, there's still a cloud of witnesses now.
Amen.
They're still alive. So Jesus said, I sent you out to reap where you have not labored. Others have labored, and you've entered into their labors. So someone came before you, and no matter what we think about them not doing right, well, at least they got you here. And so we're not just redeeming stuff for the ones come after us. We're redeeming stuff for the ones who went before us. And we all celebrate. We all celebrate together. So again, thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to pray. Yes. Lord, for anyone who is encountering these words, Lord, let it not be simply a recollection of natural words, but rather the Spirit. You said the heavens must receive Jesus Christ until the days of restoration of all things, all the gifts, all of the talents, all of the desires for good, all the creativity, all of the unification and beauty, flourishing, heaven on earth, heaven within us. Restoration of all those things can happen now and continue now, even until the day. In the same manner, we're already being healed, we're already being delivered, we're already been changed. In the same manner, that restoration can continue and continue and continue unto the restoration day of all things. I pray this, please, Lord of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord, that it is paid for. Every type of victory, every type of comfort where there's a challenge, creative interactions, angelic messages, revelations of joy because of fullness, filling, and fulfillment in these restorations. And I declare to be so, Heavenly Father, in the mighty name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you once again, Elder Chris, for your time. Thank you for your wealth of information. How can people find you or follow you on social media to ask the questions that I know are burning, that they want to get in when they want to get in contact with you?
Well, you can go on Facebook and Stanley Christopher Burns. Mm-hmm. Now, my son is the second, not him.
Don't contact him. We love him, but don't contact
Yeah,
him.
yeah. Unless you want to know something about Comic Con, he's down with that. He's down with it. He's good at what he's good at.
Down with it.
Now, and my apologies. Some of the other handles that I have are not before me right now, and I haven't memorized them. So, but if you send any kind of message through Stanley Christopher Burns, and there's a picture of me and my wife on the front dancing, then you know it's me.
You
Might be
can't
some other
miss him.
Stanley Burns on there. So that would
Wonderful.
be it.
Well, we'll start there. We'll start with Facebook. And thank you. Once again, we look forward to having you back. I think you'll be back on the interviewer side next week. So we
Yes.
look forward to seeing you again. For all of those listening, thank you for sitting in with us. And I hope you got something that you needed, both naturally and spiritually, about reconciliation and restoration for yourself and your family, your bloodline. We don't want to lose anything. Like Elder Chris said, if your genealogy wasn't important, that God would not have spent 5 whole books, really 6, because he got down into Matthew too. So he wouldn't have taken
Right.
the time to let you know from the garden where you came from, and as our Bishop Holcomb would say, all those begats mean something. So you and even down into all the begats into to 2025, they still mean something. So we hope that you got what you needed. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Make sure that you subscribe. We don't want you to miss out on anything that comes, any content to New Covenant Community Connect Lives channel. We are downloading constantly because we're interviewing constantly, and there's more to come. So with that, we want to say blessings to you all as we prepare for Passover tomorrow and go into this wonderful Passover season. Blessings, blessings, blessings to you all, and good night.
Good night, all.